Captain Avery Cole had always been a paradox. A woman who thrived in chaos yet craved calm, who could land a fighter jet on a shaking aircraft carrier one day and then sip coffee quietly in a civilian cafe the next. Once, her name had been whispered across airbases with awe, clipped in brevity over radio channels: Ghost Rider. That call sign had carried stories of impossible missions, daring rescues, and feats that defied logic. Avery had been the Navy's best-kept secret, a pilot who could make a crippled aircraft dance in the sky, who could turn near-certain disaster into victory. But those days were behind her, or so everyone assumed. Now she sat in the cockpit of a commercial airliner, Flight 782, a hum of fluorescent cabin lights reflecting off polished controls. Outside, the sun was a bruised orange, hanging low over the Rocky Mountains. The autopilot hummed in perfect monotony, passengers dozing, headphones in, oblivious. Avery's hands rested lightly on the yoke, the routine comfort of long-haul flying soothing her nerves. This was supposed to be a normal evening. Denver to Miami, a few thousand miles of clouds and sky, nothing more. But Avery had learned a long time ago that normal had a way of shattering without warning. Her co-pilot, a recent hire named Jason Marks, was fumbling with the pre-flight checklist. Avery caught him making a small error, a missed calibration on the throttle trim, and gently corrected him. "Relax," she said with a small smile. "The plane isn't going anywhere without me." Jason chuckled nervously, clearly aware she was joking. But there was an edge to her tone, a subtle reminder that she had done far more than commercial routes in her lifetime. Avery's mind drifted, wandering to memories she rarely allowed herself. The Navy had been unforgiving yet exhilarating. Nights where the sky was so black it swallowed everything, and only the faint glow of instruments kept pilots grounded. Missions over hostile territory where the difference between life and death could hinge on a single maneuver. Ghost Rider, they'd called her, a name earned through instinct, precision, and sheer audacity. She remembered the last mission before retirement, when a sudden mechanical failure had left a helicopter dangling over a canyon, and she had coaxed it down with nothing but skill and nerve. Her co-pilot that day had called her a miracle. Her commanding officer had called her reckless, and the Pentagon had called her classified. But now she had traded adrenaline for stability. Passengers, coffee, preset routes, smile through turbulence, hide the medals under a pile of old flight manuals in her home office. She had made a life pretending the Ghost Rider no longer existed. She had convinced herself it was safe, until tonight. A subtle vibration ran through the cockpit, almost imperceptible. Avery frowned. She ran a hand over the instruments, scanning the screens. Everything looked normal. The autopilot was steady, the altitude correct, the weather clear. Still, her gut tightened. Something in her bones whispered, "You're not alone." She ignored it, attributing it to nerves, to habit. Pilots always sense things before the instruments. It was part of the job, part of the instinct that had once saved her life more times than she could count. She reached for her coffee, and in that moment the hum of engines faltered. A slight stutter, almost imperceptible, but there. "Did you feel that?" Jason asked, eyes wide. He was already gripping his controls like a lifeline. Maybe," Avery said cautiously, her tone even, concealing the spike of panic that threatened to rise. She ran a quick diagnostic. Nothing. Engine temps were normal, fuel was fine, instruments were fine, yet the feeling lingered. It was like a shadow brushing against the side of the plane, unseen but heavy. Passengers remained oblivious, leaning back in their seats, scrolling through phones, reading magazines, talking quietly. But in the cockpit, tension hung thick, heavier than the clouds outside. Avery's jaw tightened. Something was wrong. Something didn't belong in the sky tonight, and she couldn't shake the feeling. Then, without warning, the lights flickered. A staccato flash, followed by the low thrum of a warning bell. The screens in front of her lit up red, blinking. Engine 2 had dropped 20% of power rapidly. Avery's heart jumped. She had trained for emergencies, but not this. Not with civilians on board, not with the kind of quiet routine she had promised herself. Her fingers flew over the controls, flipping switches, rerouting power. Jason mirrored her movements, his anxiety palpable. "Engine 2 is offline," he stammered. "I can't." "Shut up and follow my lead," Avery barked. Her voice was calm, sharp, controlled, the same voice that had commanded squadrons in life-or-death situations. Her hands moved instinctively, each motion precise. Emergency checklists were barked, systems restarted, power rerouted. Slowly, agonizingly, the engine coughed, a weak, stuttering growl. Avery's lips pressed into a thin line. One engine was back, barely. One engine was gone. Then came the radio. At first, just static. White noise crackling over the frequency, like distant ghosts whispering through metal and sky. Avery tried to communicate, calling air traffic control, but her voice seemed swallowed. Then a voice, deep, calm, and chillingly familiar, cut through. "Commercial Flight 782, identify yourself." Avery froze. The voice wasn't from Denver Tower. It was Miami. It carried authority, urgency, and a weight that set her teeth on edge. She glanced at Jason. His face had gone pale. Who is that?" Avery's mind raced. She scanned the radar. Nothing. Airspace was empty. But the tone was unmistakable, military, professional, precise, and somehow recognizing. She inhaled slowly. "This is Captain Avery Cole," she replied, keeping her voice steady, her hands never pausing. A long pause answered her, then a single word, low and reverent. "Ghost Rider." The hairs on Avery's neck stood on end. Impossible, she thought. She hadn't used that call sign in over a decade. No one had known she was still alive, let alone flying a commercial airliner. But the voice had recognized her, seen through the routine, the pretense, the civilian mask. The calm she had built for herself cracked, just slightly, under the weight of history, of danger, of the unknown. Jason stammered, What do they mean?" Avery didn't answer. She looked out the windshield, at the horizon glowing blood orange as night approached. Something was coming for them, something that had remembered her name, something that demanded she become Ghost Rider again, whether she wanted to or not. Her hand tightened on the yoke. She whispered almost to herself, "So it begins." And then beyond the clouds, a shadow moved with purpose, silent, swift, inhuman. Avery's stomach dropped. The sky was no longer empty. The airspace was no longer theirs. Something was watching, calculating, waiting. And she knew deep in the marrow of her bones that nothing would ever be the same again. Avery's hands remained steady on the yoke, though her mind raced. The commercial jet, normally docile and obedient, now felt like a wounded animal. The sudden engine failure, the untraceable voice over the radio, and the unknown presence closing in above the clouds made every second feel like a minute stretched by fear and instinct. Jason's hands trembled on the throttle. "Captain, what is happening?" he asked, voice tight with panic. Avery didn't answer at first. Panic would ruin them both. They needed focus, clarity, and precision. She inhaled slowly, counting to 3, letting the calm that had kept her alive in 1,000 life-or-death situations return. "Listen to me," she said finally, her voice smooth but firm. "We do this by the book. We follow the procedures, nothing else." She glanced at the warning panels. Engine 1 was running at reduced power. Engine 2 was dead. Cabin pressure was holding for now, but the gauges warned of rapid deterioration if they didn't stabilize soon. She toggled the auxiliary power unit, rerouted hydraulics, and manually engaged backup systems. The cockpit hummed with the sound of effort, of a pilot refusing to surrender. Then came the voice again, cutting through the static, calm, but with a weight that made Avery's skin crawl. "Commercial Flight 782, you are not authorized to be in this airspace. Identify yourself, now." Avery's fingers tightened on the yoke. Her voice was steady, practiced. "This is Captain Avery Cole. Commercial Flight 782. We are experiencing mechanical failure and require immediate assistance." She spoke with authority, but her heart thumped in her chest. The voice paused then, almost as if verifying something long forgotten, asked a single word she hadn't heard in over 10 years. Ghost Rider. Jason froze. Ghost Rider, what does that mean? Avery didn't answer. Her mind was racing, pulling memories from a time she thought she had left behind. The Navy, classified missions. The call sign that had once struck fear and admiration into friend and foe alike. Ghost Rider. She had been alive in stories, a ghost in the radar logs, someone the Pentagon hoped was gone, someone enemies would kill to erase. And now, that name had resurfaced, carried on a military frequency meant for pilots who were trained to recognize legends. And Avery Cole, once retired, now commercial, was back in the game whether she liked it or not. Her eyes scanned the horizon, and then she saw them. Two silver streaks slicing through the clouds like predators, F-16s. They were perfectly positioned, flanking her plane, engines roaring, afterburners lighting up the thin dusk air. They weren't here to escort, they were assessing, challenging, reading her. Her stomach clenched. These weren't routine military intercepts. These were pilots who recognized Ghost Rider, who remembered the woman who had survived impossible missions, who had outmaneuvered them all in war zones they barely talked about. And she was supposed to be dead. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the radio, strained but respectful. "Captain Cole, is that really you?" We thought," his words faltered. Avery cut him off, voice tight. "I'm here, let's focus on the aircraft." There was no room for nostalgia, no room for hesitation. Every second counted. She looked at Jason. "Follow my lead, trust me." Jason nodded, pale, wide-eyed, finally understanding that she was not an ordinary commercial pilot. Avery reached beneath the panel and flicked a concealed switch, a manual reroute she had installed years ago for emergencies like this. The auxiliary systems hummed to life. Engine 1 roared more steadily, holding power against the failing systems. But it wasn't enough. Suddenly, alarms screamed as the jet jolted violently. Avery fought the yoke, countering the roll. A faint explosion reverberated through the fuselage. Impact, she realized. Something had hit them, maybe a bird strike, maybe debris. No, the precision, the timing, it wasn't random. Someone had targeted them. She calculated instinctively trajectory, velocity, impact points. Then her stomach sank. It wasn't random, it was deliberate. Someone knew exactly where they were. Someone was hunting Ghost Rider. She ordered Jason to maintain altitude and speed as best he could. "We're not going down today," she said firmly. Her voice carried over the intercom, soft but resolute. "You hear me? We're staying in the air. We survive. That's all that matters." The passengers, unaware of the near catastrophe in the cockpit, remained calm or oblivious. Avery wished she could let them see her face, see the tension, the fear, but there was no time, not yet. One F-16 moved closer, the other keeping a wider orbit. Avery felt the recognition in their maneuvers, the calculated respect, the almost imperceptible caution. They weren't enemies, but they weren't here to help. They were observers, measuring her skills, assessing whether she was capable of handling the situation. And she was. She always had been. Her mind darted to tactical maneuvers, the kind she had executed countless times during classified missions. She adjusted her flight path subtly, testing the limits of the failing engine, keeping the aircraft steady, forcing herself to remember the pilot she had buried beneath commercial smiles. This wasn't just survival, it was proving herself to the sky, to the legend that refused to die. Then came another voice over the radio, closer this time, deliberate, menacing. "You are being tracked. Unauthorized flight. Prepare to comply. Ghost Rider." The last word hung in the air like smoke, curling around her senses. Avery's pulse spiked. They knew. And whatever force was behind that voice wasn't going to let a retired commercial pilot or a former Navy legend walk away unchallenged. Jason swallowed hard. "Captain, are they going to shoot?" Avery's jaw tightened. "Not if I can help it." She scanned the instruments. Altitude dropping, fuel consumption rising, engine integrity slipping. And above them the second F-16 adjusted, signaling a warning. She didn't flinch. She had faced worse, much worse, and she was alive. Her gaze flicked to the horizon where the first hints of night were creeping in. The last vestiges of daylight painted the clouds with a blood-orange hue. It was beautiful, fragile, fleeting. And in that brief window of calm, Avery made a decision. She would not simply wait to be targeted. She would act. She would show them why Ghost Rider was a name that lingered in the airspace of legends, why her enemies whispered it as if summoning a storm. And then, without warning, the plane shuddered violently. Another explosion, this time closer. She felt metal twist beneath her fingers, instruments flicker, alarms scream in a cacophony of panic. Jason screamed as he gripped the controls. "We're not." Avery cut him off, voice low, commanding, "Trust me, I've done this before." The F-16s flanked her tighter, scanning, calculating. And for a brief, terrifying instant, everything slowed. The engines, the alarms, the screaming, the fear, everything reduced to one truth. They had entered a battlefield in which the enemy was unknown, the rules were gone, and she was no longer a civilian. Ghost Rider had returned. The radio crackled again, the voice sharper this time. "Identify yourself immediately. Ghost Rider, confirm your status." Avery's hands clenched the yoke. She didn't flinch. "I am who I am, and if you want to survive this, follow my lead." Silence followed. A silence so heavy it pressed against her chest, against her lungs, against the very plane she was holding in the sky. And then faintly in the distance above the clouds, a shadow moved. Silent, swift, watching, waiting. Avery knew, with that gut-deep certainty, that Flight 782's ordinary passengers were about to witness a war that had been dormant for years. A legend reborn. A Ghost Rider unleashed. The first F-16 moved closer, slicing through the clouds with lethal precision. Its silver fuselage reflected the fading sunlight in a way that made it look like a predator stalking prey. Avery's hands remained steady on the yoke, but her mind raced faster than any autopilot could calculate. She wasn't just flying a commercial jet anymore. She was navigating a battlefield suspended in midair. Every instrument, every gauge, every sound was a potential threat or a lifeline. "Lead pilot, confirm visual," the second F-16's voice crackled over the radio. There was a flicker of disbelief in the tone, the same incredulity Avery had heard when the first voice called her Ghost Rider. These weren't just pilots. They were warriors trained to recognize legends. Avery had been one of them once, long ago. The past she had buried so carefully now surged to the surface, alive, demanding action. Jason stammered beside her, pale and trembling. "Captain, they know you. They know everything." Avery didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked to the radar. The sky was no longer empty. Something else was moving out there, fast, coordinated, almost intelligent. She had seen formations like this before, drone swarms, tactical strikes, but never targeting a commercial aircraft. And never her. She tightened her grip on the yoke. "We need to keep altitude, maintain heading. Don't make sudden moves unless I say so." Her voice was calm, but every muscle in her body was coiled, ready to react. This wasn't just survival. This was a test, and the enemy was invisible. The first drone appeared on the radar, a small, fast-moving dot, almost imperceptible against the evening sky. Then another, and another. Avery's stomach sank. This wasn't random. Someone had deployed multiple UAVs, each programmed to intercept and disable a plane. The drones weren't just weapons, they were warnings, and whoever sent them knew exactly who Ghost Rider was. "Drones incoming," she warned Jason. "Stay sharp." Jason's hands shook, but he followed her directions, eyes darting between instruments and the clouds outside. The F-16s adjusted their positions, forming a protective wedge around the commercial jet. Avery recognized the maneuvers. They weren't just flying. They were guarding, assessing, waiting to see if she could handle what was coming. And she would. She had no choice. The lead drone struck first. It slammed into the plane's right engine nacelle with a force that rattled the fuselage. Warning lights flared. Smoke curled from the damage, and the vibration threatened to throw the aircraft off balance. Avery's mind raced. She remembered emergency procedures from years ago, procedures no commercial pilot had ever encountered. She toggled switches, rerouted hydraulics, and manually adjusted thrust. The plane shuddered but stabilized. "Engine 2 is compromised," she said, voice tight. "We're running on 1. Maintain composure." The F-16 lead pilot's voice came over the radio again, clipped but respectful. "Captain Cole, Ghost Rider, your handling is impressive, but there's more." Avery's pulse quickened. She didn't like the implication. "Explain." Before he could respond, a new wave of drones appeared on the radar. 6, then 8. They moved with coordination, forming a pattern that suggested strategy, not randomness. Avery's stomach churned. Whoever was behind this knew exactly how to isolate her, disable her, and force her down. And if she went down, it wouldn't be a simple crash, it would be an execution. "Brace for impact," she muttered under her breath. Not to Jason, not to the passengers, to herself. The fight was only beginning. The first F-16 fired a warning flare, and Avery realized the pilot was giving her a cue. She needed to maneuver to survive, but without losing control of the aircraft. This wasn't about aerial acrobatics. It was about improvisation, about instinct, about reading the enemy and responding before they acted. Avery felt the old Ghost Rider presence awaken inside her. The calm, the precision, the fearlessness. She wasn't just a commercial pilot anymore. She was a warrior in the sky. The drones surged closer, their trajectories precise, almost anticipating her movements. Avery banked the plane sharply, rolling through a maneuver that should have been impossible for a jet of this size. The right wing groaned under the stress, metal screaming, but the plane held. The F-16s mirrored her movements, guiding her through the aerial chess game, their communications terse but encouraging. Jason's voice trembled. I've never seen anything like this." "You will," Avery said, eyes narrowing. She scanned the horizon. Something was different about these drones. They weren't just weapons. They were scouts, probes, each relaying data back to someone in command. Whoever controlled them wanted to understand her, test her limits, see if the legend of Ghost Rider was true, and she would show them it was. Suddenly, one drone broke formation and dove directly at the plane's left wing. Avery reacted instantly, banking hard, almost losing altitude, her hands flying over every control she knew. The drone missed by inches, striking the fuselage with a sharp metallic clang that sent sparks flying. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants braced, gripping overhead rails, terrified. Avery's eyes flicked to Jason, who was pale and wide-eyed. "You're doing fine," she said, though her own voice betrayed the tension. "Just keep up." The F-16 lead came in close, signal flares guiding her through the maneuvers. Avery realized they weren't here to attack. They were allies in all but name. They were testing her, challenging her, helping her survive without directly intervening. The realization gave her focus. If she could get through this, she could reclaim a part of herself she had thought lost forever. The drones regrouped, forming a tightening circle around the aircraft. Avery's instincts screamed at her. They were trying to hurt her, trap her, force her into a kill zone. She took a deep breath and made a decision. She would not follow their path. She would lead, improvise, and fight. Avery banked sharply, diving the aircraft into a cloud bank where visibility dropped to 0. Sensors flashed warnings, instruments went haywire, but she relied on her instincts, the muscle memory honed over years of combat. The drones followed, but the cloud distorted their sensors, causing collisions and misfires. Sparks rained around the fuselage as metal scraped metal. The plane trembled, but it stayed aloft. Then came a new sound, an unmistakable, deep hum above the clouds. Another formation of F-16s, their afterburners painting streaks across the darkening sky. Avery realized with a surge of adrenaline that they weren't just observing anymore. They were engaging. The shadows that had threatened her now had to contend with the legends themselves. Her stomach tightened, a mix of fear and exhilaration. The legend she thought she had buried, the Ghost Rider she had left behind, was alive. And the enemies in the sky were about to learn that some ghosts never die. They come back, sharper, faster, deadlier than anyone remembers. Jason whispered, voice barely audible, "Captain, I don't think we're going to make it." Avery's eyes locked on the horizon. "We will, but we're not going to do it quietly." The plane shuddered as another drone struck, a metallic screech tearing through the fuselage. Sparks flew across the instrument panel. Warning lights flashed red. Passengers screamed, holding onto armrests, bracing for impact. Avery ignored it. She wasn't afraid. She couldn't be. Not now. Not with the sky alive around her, the F-16s flanking her, the legend calling her name once more. And then above the clouds, a faint signal crackled. The voice she had recognized weeks ago, the one that had called her Ghost Rider, came through again. "Captain Cole, you've survived the first wave. Prepare for the second." Avery's lips pressed into a thin line. "I've survived worse," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. The clouds parted slightly, revealing the approaching threat. Not one, not two, but dozens of drones moving with precision, their sensors locking onto Flight 782. And at the lead, a silhouette appeared, a figure controlling the swarm, orchestrating the attack, watching Ghost Rider struggle and fight. Avery's heart raced, adrenaline surging. This wasn't just survival, this was war, and she was no longer a commercial pilot. She was the storm itself. Avery's knuckles whitened as she gripped the yoke. The clouded sky trembled with the hum of approaching drones, each one calculated, precise, relentless. Sparks still streaked the cockpit from the earlier strike, warning lights painting the interior red. She could hear Jason's shallow breaths beside her, the tension almost palpable. Her co-pilot, skilled as he was in commercial flying, had no idea the storm they were entering was beyond ordinary airspace violations. This wasn't an accident. It was a hunt, and the hunters knew exactly who they were after. The first wave of drones had been a test. This next wave was real. They struck with precision, striking the fuselage at points that twisted the jet violently. Avery fought the aircraft as if she were battling a living creature. Her mind, honed by years of military missions, assessed every angle: wind currents, drone trajectories, altitude limitations, and the limited control she had over a commercial jet. Every move was a calculated risk. Failure meant death, not just for her, but for the 185 passengers behind her. "Brace for impact," she shouted, though the cabin was already in chaos. Flight attendants clutched seat rails, screaming passengers clutched each other. Avery's voice was firm, commanding, cutting through the panic like steel. She toggled every emergency protocol she could remember, rerouted auxiliary power, and forced the jet into a sharp, evasive maneuver. Sparks erupted along the fuselage. Metal groaned, yet the aircraft remained airborne. The F-16s flanked her like silent guardians, performing maneuvers that mirrored her own, protecting the commercial jet as if it were a prized asset. The lead pilot's voice came over the radio again, clipped but urgent. "Captain Cole, we need to know your capabilities. Can you handle more than evasive maneuvers?" Avery's pulse spiked. "I can handle whatever comes, just tell me where to go." The second F-16 cut in sharply. "Ghost Rider, it's bigger than you realize. These drones aren't autonomous. They're controlled, coordinated. You're not just being intercepted, you're being targeted." Avery's stomach sank. Her eyes narrowed. She had faced impossible odds before, in places no one would ever know, on missions that had been scrubbed from official records. She had survived ambushes, mechanical failures, and gunfire at 30,000 feet, but nothing like this. Nothing that put innocent lives in the crossfire. And now, her hidden past was colliding with her present in the most violent way possible. "Who sent them?" Jason asked, voice trembling. Avery didn't answer. She couldn't, not yet. Whoever was behind this had access to military-grade technology and intelligence. They weren't amateurs, and their knowledge of her, that was personal. Someone had spent years tracking Ghost Rider, anticipating her moves, studying her history, waiting for the right moment to strike. Her mind flicked back to classified missions, long erased from public record. Ghost Rider had been deployed to extract assets from hostile zones, fly crippled aircraft to safety, and survive mechanical failures that no one else could navigate. And now, those very skills were needed again, but in a context she had never expected, protecting ordinary civilians from a shadow war she was supposed to have left behind. Another strike tore through the fuselage, closer this time. Avery fought to maintain control. They're not just testing us, they're trying to disable the engines completely, she realized. Sparks flew across the instrument panel. The rudder shuddered. A low, metallic screech echoed as if the plane itself were crying out. She felt the familiar fear, sharp and immediate, but she didn't let it control her. Fear was a tool, not a weapon, and she wielded it like she always had. Jason, reroute auxiliary power to the hydraulics. Full manual override, she commanded, her voice cutting through panic and static. Her hands moved with lightning speed, flipping switches, recalibrating systems, coaxing the wounded aircraft into obedience. The jet groaned, but it held. Then came the realization that made her stomach drop. These drones weren't random strikes. They were her past come to life. Every maneuver, every calculated attack mirrored techniques she had once taught or encountered in classified operations. This wasn't just about the passengers. This was personal. Someone had deliberately reconstructed scenarios that tested her limits, pushed her instincts, and forced her to operate at the apex of her legendary abilities. Her pulse spiked as she realized the truth. The Pentagon had never truly retired Ghost Rider. They had erased her from records, left her to live a civilian life, but some files remained classified. Missions that she thought were forgotten, people she thought she'd left behind, they were all part of a network that now recognized her. And someone was using that network against her. The sky ahead shimmered with the reflection of more drones. Their formation was tighter now, calculated to encircle her. Avery's mind raced. She couldn't escape. She couldn't outrun them in a commercial jet. She had to fight. Her eyes flicked to the F-16s. The lead pilot spoke again, voice sharp. "Ghost Rider, we can't engage. Rules of engagement. You're on your own for the next 2 minutes. Survive it or—" Avery's jaw clenched. No time for hesitation. She banked sharply, diving into a pocket of storm clouds. Turbulence shook the plane violently. Lightning illuminated the cockpit in jagged flashes, revealing the terror and determination in Jason's eyes. "We can't hide forever," he shouted. "We won't," Avery replied. "We'll fight smart, we'll fight fast, and we'll survive." The drones followed, sensors flashing, a deadly ballet in the fatting sky. Avery recalled tactical evasive maneuvers from her past, adapting them to a commercial jet, a craft far too large and slow for such precision. Each movement tested the limits of physics, of engineering, of human nerve. Sparks flew from the fuselage as the plane scraped the edges of the clouds. Suddenly, the lead drone struck again, targeting the already weakened right engine. Alarms blared. Metal shrieked. Avery's stomach churned as she realized they were moments away from losing power entirely. She reached beneath the panel and activated a backup manual fuel line, a risky move she hadn't attempted since Navy training. The engine roared back to life, weak but functional. She exhaled just enough to steady herself. "We're not out yet," she muttered. And then the voice returned over the radio, clear, calm, cold, familiar. "Ghost Rider, you're proving yourself, but the next wave will not be so forgiving." Avery's eyes narrowed. "I've survived worse, bring it on." A low hum grew in the distance, distinct from the drones. A larger, more organized threat was approaching. Avery realized with a chill that ran from her spine to her toes that they weren't just fighting drones. They were fighting an entire operation designed to test her, to hunt her, and to finally erase the legend she had once been. She looked at Jason. "Hold on, this is where it gets dangerous." The plane shuddered violently, the fuselage groaning as another strike hit. Sparks showered the cockpit. Passengers screamed. Flight attendants braced for impact. Avery's hands tightened on the yoke. She was calm. She was focused. She was Ghost Rider. And for the first time in a decade, she felt the familiar thrill. The the one that came when life and death balanced on the edge of a wingtip. The legend had returned, and the world was about to remember why. The cabin shook violently, jolted by the relentless assault of drones. Sparks flew from the fuselage, metal groaning like it had a life of its own. Passengers screamed, clutching seats and each other. Flight attendants shouted instructions, their voices almost lost in the cacophony of alarms and twisted metal. But in the cockpit, Avery Cole, once Ghost Rider Navy legend, was in her element. The fear that coursed through the plane wasn't hers. She had trained for impossible situations. This was merely another problem to solve, and she thrived under pressure. Jason was white as a sheet, his hands trembling on the throttle. "Captain, we're going to die," he stammered, eyes wide as the plane lurched. Avery's jaw tightened. "We're not going to die," she snapped. Her voice was a razor, commanding, sharp, precise. "We're going to fight, and if anyone survives this, it's going to be us." She reached for the auxiliary power, rerouting hydraulics, manipulating throttles, coaxing the wounded aircraft to respond. Sparks flared across the panel. The fuselage shuddered violently, but she held it. Outside, the F-16s flanked them, their afterburners cutting through the darkening sky like twin comets. Avery recognized the lead pilot's movements. They were coordinating with her, signaling without words, letting her know when to dodge, when to rise, when to push the aircraft to its limits. She responded instinctively, banking the jet sharply, narrowly avoiding a drone that streaked toward them at impossible speed. Metal screeched as the impact glanced past the fuselage. "They're testing us," she muttered under her breath. Her mind raced. Every strike, every maneuver, every aggressive trajectory was deliberate. Whoever controlled the drones knew exactly how to push her, how to test her skill, how to force her to reveal herself. And Avery intended to give them more than they expected. "Jason," she said, voice calm despite the chaos, "we're going to fight back, not just survive." Jason blinked, confused and terrified. How do we fight drones with a commercial airliner?" Avery didn't answer him, not yet. She adjusted the flaps, banking the plane toward a sudden downdraft, using turbulence as a shield. One drone struck, skimming the tail, and she felt the metal twist under her hands. Sparks erupted. Warning lights screamed, but the plane held. Her heart pounded. Every instinct from her Navy days screamed at her. "You are not here to fly passengers. You are here to survive, to dominate, to prove you are Ghost Rider." She reached beneath the console and activated a hidden modification she had installed years ago, a fail-safe manual override for emergency fuel and thrust management, a trick no commercial pilot had ever considered. Engine 1 surged, compensating for the damaged Engine 2. The plane lurched, responded, and then stabilized. Avery smiled grimly. "That's how you fight back." The F-16 lead pilot's voice cut over the radio, clipped but approving. "Ghost Rider, impressive. You're not just surviving, you're controlling this." Avery glanced at him, a flicker of the old camaraderie returning. "We control our own fate," she replied. Her voice was calm, but there was fire in it, a fire Jason could now see, feel, and perhaps understand. She surveyed the drones approaching, their formation tighter than ever. Avery realized these weren't simple machines. They were coordinated, almost intelligent, responding to her maneuvers, anticipating her. Whoever controlled them had studied her past, her tactics, her habits. She clenched her jaw. That knowledge would be their undoing. Avery banked sharply, diving into a cloud bank, the commercial jet shaking violently in her hands. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the chaos. Sparks rained from the fuselage as drones collided with each other in the storm, sensors confused by the sudden darkness and turbulence. She was no longer hiding. She was taking the fight to them. "Jason, follow my lead," she shouted. He scrambled, heart pounding, matching her movements as best he could. Avery pushed the plane to impossible angles, exploiting the storm, exploiting the drone's weaknesses. One by one, the drones faltered. Sparks erupted as metal twisted and collided. A small explosion shook the left wing. The passengers screamed, their world tilting with every maneuver. But Avery didn't flinch. She thrived on the chaos, her mind working faster than the storm itself. She remembered the secret routes, evasive tactics, and emergency maneuvers from her Navy days. This plane, her passengers, even her terrified co-pilot, everything was now part of the battlefield. She had been hiding for years, pretending to be someone else. Now she was herself again, Ghost Rider. Suddenly, a new sound pierced the roar of engines and storm, a deep mechanical hum distinct from the drones. Avery's pulse quickened. She scanned the horizon. A larger, more formidable craft appeared, a mothership of drones, a mobile command unit controlling the swarm below. The realization hit her. This was not just an ambush. It was an organized, premeditated strike designed specifically for her. The lead F-16 pilot's voice was urgent now. "Ghost Rider, that's a drone control unit. Take it down or the swarm will never stop." Avery's eyes narrowed. She had no weapons, no missiles, no military support beyond 2 F-16s. But she had experience, precision, instincts honed over decades. She would improvise. She banked sharply, lining the jet with the massive mothership. The cloud cover and turbulence masked her approach. She felt the fuselage shudder, warning lights screaming. Sparks erupted as she skimmed dangerously close. She could feel the power in the engines, the strain in the wings, the battle between machine and human instinct. Then a sudden flash. Lightning struck nearby, illuminating the control unit. Avery adjusted, calculating a trajectory only a combat veteran could manage. The commercial jet, battered and wounded, surged forward, striking the mothership with its fuselage. There was an explosion, a shower of sparks, and the drones scattered in chaos. Some plummeted out of the sky, others collided midair. Jason yelled, "You did it!" But Avery's eyes were still locked on the horizon. She knew the fight wasn't over. This was only the first real victory. The larger threat remained. Whoever had orchestrated this attack would respond, and soon. The F-16s flanked her once more, engines screaming. The lead pilot's voice came over the radio, clipped but impressed. "Ghost Rider, you just reminded us why you were the best, but this is far from over." Avery exhaled, a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. Sparks rained from the fuselage, warning lights flared, and the passengers, still terrified, had no idea how close they had come to death. Yet for Avery, this was familiar territory, the thrill, the fear, the control, the responsibility. She was alive. She was commanding the impossible. She was Ghost Rider. Then, just as she began to assess her next move, another signal crackled over the radio. Calm, precise, cold. "Ghost Rider, you survived the first engagement. Now the real challenge begins. Prepare yourself." Avery's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked at Jason, who was pale and trembling. "Hold on," she said. "This is just the beginning." The sky ahead darkened, filled with shadows moving in perfect coordination. Avery's pulse surged. She had taken the fight to them, but she knew instinctively the enemy wasn't finished. The swarm, the mothership, the unknown forces orchestrating this, they were waiting for her next move. And Ghost Rider was ready. Avery Cole's hands were raw from gripping the yoke, her knuckles white as she guided the wounded airliner through the darkening sky. The fuselage trembled beneath her, scarred from strikes and sparks, warning lights screaming a chorus of alarms. Jason sat beside her, pale and wide-eyed, clutching the throttle like a lifeline, every fiber of his body trembling. He was a commercial pilot, trained for routine flights, not dogfights against a swarm of drones orchestrated by someone who knew her past better than she did. The storm clouds outside swirled like a living entity, shadows twisting and shifting as the remnants of the first drone assault scattered across the sky. Yet Avery knew instinctively, the enemy was not retreating, they were gathering. The mothership had taken a temporary hit, but it had merely dispersed the swarm. More were coming, faster, smarter, coordinated to exploit every weakness in the jet. "Jason," she said calmly, though her body hummed with adrenaline, "you've seen nothing yet. Stay sharp, trust me." His voice trembled. I'm trying, Captain, but I've never seen anything like this." Avery offered him a brief nod, her eyes scanning the radar. The second wave of drones was forming in a tighter formation, their vectors calculated to force her into a narrow corridor of vulnerability. Sparks erupted along the fuselage as one brushed against the right wing. The metal groaned. Alarms blared. Panic threatened to take over, but she pushed it aside. Fear was a tool, not a master. She banked sharply, taking the plane into a steep dive. The G-forces pressed against her chest, her legs burning with strain. Every passenger in the cabin screamed in terror, unaware that the pilot at the controls was executing maneuvers she had only attempted in fighter jets half her size. Lightning flashed, illuminating the sky in jagged bursts, revealing the enemy swarm closing in, calculated, relentless. "Brace," she shouted through the intercom. Flight attendants scrambled to secure passengers. The plane shuddered violently as another drone struck, scraping along the fuselage, sparks showering like meteor fragments. But the aircraft remained airborne, responding to Avery's commands as if acknowledging her authority. She smiled grimly. Still got it. The F-16s flanking her executed precision maneuvers, signaling with flares and radio bursts, subtly guiding her through the battlefield. She recognized the lead pilot's movements. He was calculating, protective, trusting her instincts. They weren't just allies, they were mirrors, reflecting her own skill back at her, and she used every ounce of it. Then came the first sign that the swarm had a new directive. The drones began coordinating strikes on critical points, engine intakes, control surfaces, avionics panels. Avery's eyes narrowed. Whoever orchestrated this had studied her tactics, her emergency protocols, her known weaknesses. They weren't just trying to shoot her down, they were trying to break her, to force a fatal mistake. Her mind raced through every maneuver she had ever learned, every combat scenario she had survived. This wasn't just about flying anymore. It was about improvisation, adaptation, survival against impossible odds. She toggled auxiliary controls, rerouted hydraulic lines, and engaged manual overrides in sequences that would have been laughably complex to a civilian pilot. The jet shuddered but obeyed her commands. Jason's voice trembled beside her. "Captain, I think they're trying to herd us into the storm." Avery glanced outside. Indeed, the cloud bank ahead had thickened into a nearly impenetrable wall. The drones circled, herding, shaping, manipulating her flight path. They weren't attacking yet, they were corralling her. And she knew exactly what that meant. The next wave would strike with lethal intent. She drew a deep breath, her mind narrowing to razor focus. There was only one way to survive: turn the tables. "Jason," she said, voice steady, "we're not just going to evade, we're going to lead." He looked at her, confusion and terror battling all. "Lead them? How?" "Follow my maneuvers. Trust me. We're going to make them think we're vulnerable, and then we're going to hit back." She initiated a series of deceptive dives and climbs, each one calculated to lure the drones into miscalculations. Some collided midair. Others misjudged angles and brushed past, sparks flying across the fuselage. The commercial jet, wounded, battered, groaning, became a predator in its own right. Avery guided it with precision born of instinct, experience, and sheer nerve. Then the mothership reappeared, larger than before, more imposing, orchestrating the swarm with terrifying efficiency. Avery's heart thumped, not with fear but with anticipation. She had survived worse. She had fought impossible battles in helicopters crippled over hostile territory, in fighter jets where one wrong move meant death. And she was about to show this predator why Ghost Rider was more than a name. She banked sharply, skimming the storm's edge, forcing the mothership into a narrow approach. The wind screamed past the fuselage, turbulence rocking the plane, but she maintained control. Sparks erupted as drones collided with one another, miscalculating in the sudden turbulence she had engineered. The mothership's sensors flashed red, its operators clearly struggling to compensate. Jason's voice was barely audible over the chaos. "Captain, you're insane." Avery smiled grimly. Insane keeps people alive. Then she saw it, an opening. A tight corridor in the cloud cover, a perfect trajectory past the mothership's blind spot. She banked the plane, dodging incoming drones, and dove through the corridor with precision. The commercial jet screamed, wings bending, fuselage shuddering, but it remained in control. Sparks flew, alarms blared, and for a heartbeat, the entire sky seemed to pause. The drones reacted too slowly. Some crashed into each other, others plummeted out of control. The mothership wavered, disoriented. Avery seized the moment. She engaged the manual thrust override, pushing the plane to the limits of its design. The fuselage groaned, engines strained, but she maintained control. Then the unexpected. The lead F-16 pilot's voice, calm and approving. "Ghost Rider, you're not just surviving, you're taking the fight to them." Avery's pulse surged. She had proven herself. But she knew instinctively the worst was yet to come. Whoever was orchestrating this assault wasn't going to give up. This was only the prelude, the first major test. The drones scattered, regrouping for the next wave. She glanced at Jason. "Hold on tight, the real challenge is coming." The cabin rattled violently, passengers screaming, flight attendants bracing. Avery's eyes narrowed on the dark horizon. Shadows shifted. The storm intensified, and in the distance beyond the clouds she saw movement, hundreds of drones, faster, more coordinated, forming a deadly wave that promised destruction. Avery's hands tightened on the yoke. She wasn't afraid. She couldn't be. Not now, not ever again. The calm, focused intensity of Ghost Rider surged through her. The past she had tried to leave behind, the legend she had buried under civilian life. It was alive again, in every movement, in every decision, in every heartbeat. And she would not fail. The sky trembled around Flight 782. The next wave was coming, and Ghost Rider was ready. The horizon was alive with menace. Hundreds of drones, glinting like shards of steel in the fatting light, advanced in perfect coordination, cutting through the storm with deadly precision. Avery Cole's hands were steady on the yoke, but her mind was a whirlwind of calculations, instincts, and memories. The commercial jet she commanded groaned under strain, metal screaming as the engines burned at maximum capacity. Sparks rained from previous strikes, warning lights flickered in frantic rhythm, yet she moved with the unshakable calm of a pilot who had danced on the edge of death more times than most could count. Jason sat frozen beside her, staring at the radar, his face as pale as the clouds around them. "Captain, this isn't a drill," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "It's real," Avery said, her voice calm but cutting through the tension like steel. "And we're going to survive it." The F-16s flanking them performed intricate maneuvers, shielding the commercial jet as best they could, yet Avery knew they could only do so much. The swarm was massive, relentless, and coordinated to perfection. These weren't amateur drones, they were military-grade, controlled by someone who knew her history, someone who had studied her like a puzzle, someone who wanted to erase Ghost Rider from the skis forever. Her mind flicked through decades of tactical training. She recalled missions over hostile territory, nights spent flying crippled aircraft under enemy fire, moments when every decision determined life or death. Those lessons were now her lifeline. The commercial jet, unarmed, unfit for combat, was in the cockpit of a master, and she intended to turn it into a weapon of strategy and survival. "Jason," she said, locking eyes with him, "I need you sharp. Follow my lead, every maneuver matters, every second counts." He nodded, hands gripping the throttle as if it were a lifeline, heart hammering in his chest. "Yes, Captain, I'm with you." The first drone struck, colliding with the fuselage near the tail. Sparks erupted, metal twisted, alarms screamed. Avery fought the yoke with every ounce of strength, banking sharply, dodging another wave of drones. The F-16s mirrored her movements, providing cover, but the swarm adapted, dividing, circling, herding them into a narrow corridor. Avery gritted her teeth. "They're trying to trap us," she muttered. "We'll give them what they want, but not how they expect it." She initiated a sequence of maneuvers designed to deceive, distract, and dominate. The jet banked hard, diving through the clouds, twisting with impossible precision for a craft of its size. Lightning illuminated the sky, revealing the swarm's relentless advance. Drones collided, misjudged trajectories, and faltered under the chaotic dance she orchestrated. Jason yelled, "Captain, how are you doing this? We should have been shredded." "I've done this before," Avery said, voice taut but steady. "We're not finished yet." Then came the unmistakable hum of the mothership. The command unit loomed above the clouds, orchestrating the swarm with precision, its operators calculating, analyzing, waiting for her to falter. Avery recognized the style immediately. The same cold, clinical tactics she had faced in classified Navy operations. They were not improvising. They were executing a strategy designed to push her to the absolute edge. Her pulse spiked. This wasn't just combat, it was a test, a game designed to humiliate, challenge, and finally destroy Ghost Rider. She exhaled, letting the old instinct rise, letting the calm focus she had buried for years reclaim her. She wasn't a commercial pilot anymore. She was Ghost Rider, the legend, the warrior, the survivor. "Jason," she said, her eyes narrowing, "we're going to end this now. Follow my lead to the letter." He swallowed hard. "Yes, Captain." Avery adjusted the plane, using the turbulence of the storm to her advantage. The commercial jet, battered and scarred, became a predator in the chaos. Drones collided midair, miscalculating her maneuvers, sparks raining from their metal frames. She banked sharply, dodging strikes, exploiting the storm to disrupt the swarm's formation. And then she struck. Avery dove toward the mothership, the massive commercial jet hurtling like a missile through the storm. Sparks showered the fuselage as drones collided with one another in confusion. The mothership's sensors struggled to compensate, its operators frantic as the jet bore down with terrifying precision. The first strike tore into the hull of the mothership, sending metal and circuitry scattering. Drones faltered, some plummeting out of the sky. Avery twisted, banking sharply, slamming the fuselage against a vulnerable point she had calculated in her Navy days. Old instincts made deadly precise. The mothership shuddered, alarms blaring. Jason screamed, "Captain, we're going to crash." "No," she said, voice cutting through chaos, "we're going to survive. Hold on." She banked, spiraled, and dove through a gap in the swarm, exploiting the storm, exploiting the enemy's overconfidence. Drones collided in a cascade of sparks. The mothership rocked violently, its control over the swarm faltering. Avery seized the opportunity. With a precise maneuver, she clipped the rear of the mothership with the plane's fuselage. Metal screeched, sparks exploded, and drones fell like rain. The F-16s mirrored her attack, firing precision flares to disrupt the remaining drones, guiding Flight 782 through the chaos. The swarm, once coordinated and terrifying, now staggered under her relentless assault. She had turned the hunter into the hunted. But the fight was far from over. From the shadowed clouds, a new formation appeared, smaller, faster, and more lethal. Avery's chest tightened. Whoever had orchestrated this attack had anticipated her moves. They weren't finished. They had adapted, and they were coming for her again, now with a precision and focus that promised death. She glanced at Jason, who was white-knuckled and wide-eyed. "Captain, we can't survive another wave like this." Avery's eyes narrowed, her pulse steady, her mind razor-sharp. "We're not just going to survive, we're going to win. Follow my lead." The storm intensified. The night closed in, shadows twisting and swirling around them. Lightning flashed, illuminating the jets, the drones, the mothership, and the commercial plane, all caught in a deadly dance. Sparks flew, metal groaned, alarms screamed. Every passenger clutched their seats, unaware of the war raging just above their heads. And then the voice returned over the radio, cold, precise, and unmistakable. "Ghost Rider, you've survived the first engagement, but the true test begins now. Are you ready to die for your legend?" Avery pressed her lips into a thin line, eyes locked on the horizon where the new formation loomed. She didn't hesitate. She wasn't afraid. She was Ghost Rider. "Bring it on," she muttered. The sky erupted around Flight 782. Sparks, metal, wind, and engines screamed in a symphony of chaos. Avery banked, dove, and spiraled through the storm, every movement calculated, every maneuver precise. She had survived worse. She had faced death countless times in silent, impossible skis, and she would survive again. The shadows were closing in, but Avery Cole, Ghost Rider, was ready. The sky was a battlefield. Dark clouds twisted above, flashes of lightning illuminating the carnage around Flight 782. Hundreds of drones, faster, deadlier, more coordinated than before, cut through the storm with surgical precision. The commercial jet shuddered under the strain, fuselage groaning, sparks showering the cockpit and cabin. Every warning light screamed a warning of imminent failure. Yet in the cockpit, Avery Cole, once Ghost Rider, now fully alive in her legend, was calm, laser-focused, every movement precise, every decision calculated. She was not just surviving. She was fighting, leading, and controlling a war that no one expected a civilian plane could wage. Jason, white as a ghost and trembling, clutched the throttle. "Captain, I think this is it. We can't survive another strike like the last." Avery's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. The new wave of drones was approaching at blinding speed, coordinated to force them into a kill zone. "We will," she said firmly. "We have no choice but to fight, and we will win." Her hands danced over the controls with a speed and precision that defied belief. The plane banked sharply, diving into a narrow gap between storm clouds. Lightning flashed, illuminating the swarming drones in a silver, deadly web. Sparks erupted along the fuselage as drones collided midair, some plummeting into the storm, others striking each other in the chaos. Every maneuver she executed exploited their overconfidence, their reliance on precision algorithms, their underestimation of human instinct. The F-16s mirrored her every move, providing a protective umbrella, but Avery knew the real battle was her own. The drones weren't just machines. They were guided by someone who understood her tactics, someone who had studied her history, someone who wanted to erase Ghost Rider from existence. And now she intended to make them regret it. She banked the plane hard, then dove, using the storm's turbulence to mask their movements. Lightning illuminated the mothership again, now damaged but still formidable, orchestrating the remaining swarm with lethal intent. Avery's pulse surged, not with fear but with exhilaration. She had faced impossible odds before, but never with innocent lives hanging in the balance. Every passenger on Flight 782 was her responsibility, and failure was not an option. "Jason," she said, voice calm but commanding, "we're going to take out the command unit. Follow my lead exactly." He swallowed hard, nodding, gripping the throttle. "Yes, Captain." Avery banked sharply, skimming through a narrow corridor between the drones, exploiting the blind spots of the mothership. Sparks rained down as drones collided midair, some plummeting into the clouds below. She adjusted the auxiliary thrust, pushing the plane to limits that should have been impossible. Metal groaned, engines screamed, but the jet responded. She had coaxed life out of a machine that was never meant for battle. The mothership loomed ahead, massive, imposing, orchestrating the remaining swarm. Avery's eyes narrowed. She recognized its weak point, a vulnerable rear panel exposed after her previous strike, but reaching it would require precision, speed, and nerves of steel. She took a deep breath, focusing entirely on the task. "Jason, brace," she whispered. The commercial jet hurtled forward, dodging drones in a deadly spiral. Sparks erupted as drones collided, alarms blared, passengers screamed, gripping their seats. The plane shuddered violently, but Avery held it with unyielding control. The first strike connected. The rear of the mothership shuddered under the fuselage's impact. Sparks, metal shards, and debris rained down. The swarm faltered, disorganized by the sudden assault. Avery twisted, banking sharply, striking again with precision. The mothership groaned, systems failing, drones plummeting from the sky like falling stars. Jason gasped, astonished. "Captain, we did it, we were winning." "Not yet," Avery said, eyes locked on the remaining threat. The swarm was down, but the mothership still moved, still dangerous. She had to finish this. She had to survive, not just for herself, but for everyone aboard Flight 782. She adjusted the plane's trajectory, lining up one final strike. The engines roared, metal screamed, and she dove with perfect precision, striking the mothership's command panel squarely. Sparks exploded, systems shorted, and the massive craft began to tumble out of control. Drones crashed in its wake. Lightning illuminated the sky as the mothership spiraled downward, a metallic behemoth undone by a single, improbable strike from a commercial airliner in the hands of a legend. The storm raged on, but the threat was neutralized. Avery leveled the plane, steadying it as best she could. The fuselage was battered, engines straining, warning lights flashing, but Flight 782 was airborne. The F-16s flanked her one last time, engines roaring in admiration, silent acknowledgement of her skill. Jason exhaled shakily. "Captain, we made it. We survived." Avery nodded, though she didn't relax completely. The storm wasn't over. The passengers were terrified, the plane damaged, and she still had to land safely. But she allowed herself a brief smile. They had survived the impossible. They had endured an assault no commercial pilot should have faced, and survived, thanks to the skills, instincts, and courage of Ghost Rider. She checked the instruments. Fuel levels were low, hydraulics stressed, engines groaning, but the plane held. The airport was visible in the distance, lights flickering like beacons through the storm. She had one chance to bring them all home, one chance to end this nightmare. "Jason," she said, voice calm, "we're going to land this plane. Follow my instructions precisely. No improvisation, one step at a time." He nodded, trembling but focused. "Yes, Captain." The descent was tense. Avery guided the damaged plane through turbulence, dodging electrical storms, adjusting for damaged control surfaces, and maintaining altitude despite the compromised engines. Sparks showered from the fuselage with every gust of wind, alarms screaming a chorus of chaos. Passengers gripped their seats, terror etched on their faces, unaware of just how close they had come to death. "Stay calm," she said over the intercom, voice steady and commanding. "We're almost home." The runway approached, lights flickering through rain and mist. Avery adjusted the flaps, coaxing the jet into a steady approach, every calculation precise, every movement deliberate. The F-16s fell back, having escorted her through the storm and the attack. She was alone now, solely responsible for the lives aboard. The touchdown was tense. Wheels touched down, skidding across wet tarmac. Sparks flew as the jet's weight pressed down, metal groaning in protest. Brakes engaged, engines screamed, and the plane came to a shuddering stop. Silence followed, heavy, almost surreal. Avery exhaled, her hands trembling slightly on the yoke. Jason slumped beside her, pale but alive. Passengers erupted in cheers, tears streaming down faces, clapping, screaming, hugging. They had survived. They had lived. And none of them had any idea who truly saved them. Avery sat for a moment, staring out at the storm, at the runway, at the clouds that had been her battlefield. She felt the old thrill, the one that came from dancing with death and emerging victorious. She had survived the impossible. She had reclaimed her legend. Ghost Rider was alive. The F-16 saluted her one last time before turning back to the clouds. Avery pressed her lips into a thin line, a mixture of exhaustion, relief, and quiet satisfaction. She had faced the storm, the swarm, the mothership, and had won. She had protected the innocent. She had proven that some legends never die, they rise again when the world needs them most. Jason looked at her, awe and gratitude etched on his face. "Captain, you're incredible." Avery allowed herself a small, wry smile. "Just did my job. But remember, Never underestimate what a commercial pilot can do when the world forces her to become Ghost Rider again. The passengers disembarked, unaware of the full story, unaware of the war that had been fought in the skies above them. But Avery didn't need recognition. She had lived, she had survived, and she had protected the lives entrusted to her. That was enough. As the rain eased and the clouds began to break, Avery sat in the cockpit, silent for a moment. Ghost Rider had returned. The legend was alive, and for the first time in years she allowed herself to truly feel it. The power, the calm, the unshakable certainty that no storm, no enemy, and no impossible odds could ever take her down. She flipped the switch, shutting down the engines, and leaned back. The war was over for now. But somewhere in the distance, a faint signal crackled on the radio. Calm, precise, cold, familiar. Avery smiled faintly, a glint of steel in her eyes. "Let them come," she whispered. "Ghost Rider is back." The clouds parted, sunlight breaking through the darkness. The sky was clear for now.